Well, Charles Smith, thank you for coming to the Texas Law Center this morning and being part of this program with
Well,
us.
Harper, I'm tickled pink to be here.
I have gotten to know you over the last few years and spend some time with you, and of course had the opportunity to study the great work you did for the bar. But I want to go back and talk about your life in general, and if you could tell us a little bit about growing up and the influences on your life that affected your career.
I was born and raised in South Bend, Indiana. Our family home was right across the street from Notre Dame.
Okay.
And my mother became ill with tuberculosis when I was just very young, and spent many, many years in the hospital. And when she got out, they said, the doctor told her that she had to either move to Phoenix or San Antonio, because that's where they went back in the middle 30s for things like tuberculosis. So she chose San Antonio. So we moved down there during the school year of each year, so she didn't have to face the severe winters of South Bend. Right. I went to school in San Antonio. I graduated from high school there in 1949, and then went to Texas A&M.
Okay. So you were an Aggie?
You betcha.
Before you went off to A&M, I know that you had influences that formed who you were. Really didn't change, but formed your character. Tell us some of the people that influenced your life up until that point in time.
Well, they were, my father died during the war in the Normandy invasion. So consequently, most of the people who had great influences on me were teachers in a very large measure, and probably the fathers, close friends of mine.
Would step in and be a role model.
Oh, you're right, and they did. I don't think they intentionally did it so much as they actually did it. And they were all very significant factors in my life. And I played baseball through high school and in the amateur leagues, primarily the Spanish American League, during that time in the late 40s. As a result of that, I went to A&M to play baseball. And I described myself as, turned out I was a 1 o'clock pitcher.
What does that mean?
Well, the ball game started at 2, and I generally chunked about 1.
Okay. Well, but you're playing a role.
Oh, you betcha.
You're important to the team.
Oh, you're right. And I got in a few games, but I was at the end of the bench.
Well, I was the guy that warmed up the pitchers because they wouldn't let me in the games at all, and that wasn't in college. So you're well beyond me. What did you learn from your experience at Texas A&M, and particularly describe A&M in that era?
A&M at that time was a school. It was all male. There were only 5,000 in the school. Everybody except for the veterans were in the Corps of Cadets. It was a very structured life. The bugle went off in the morning, you got up, you made your bed, you cleaned your room, you marched to breakfast, you went to class, you marched to lunch, you marched to supper at night. You wore a uniform all the time. You had to be at your desk studying for certain hours every night. It was very structured, and I needed that. So I was a history major, and so what does a history major do? I decided, well, I had planned on going in the service and then getting out and going to law school. I started law school.
Okay. And where'd you go to law school?
I went to St. Mary's.
And why did you pick St. Mary's?
My wife Ann and I became engaged in December of '52. And so anticipating that I would get out, go in the Army, we got married, or set the date for June the 13th. And so I graduated from A&M on May the 28th, started law school on June the 12th, got married on June the 13th, and went to St. Mary's because that's where she was from and that's where I was from, and our whole family structure was there. And when I started law school, it was anticipation of going maybe a semester or two, going in the service, then coming back.
Kind of expecting an interruption, and you didn't want to disrupt her life too much.
Right. So that's when we chose St. Mary's. And in those days, all you had to have was your transcript, and any law school would let you in. It wasn't like it is today. I'm not sure I could get into law school today.
I suspect you could, but it was even easier when I went than it is today, that's for sure. Well, who were some of the people during your law school career, professors or teachers or friends that you made that influenced you?
Well, of course, the professors were very influential on my life. The dean was Ernest Raba, and he turned out to be a very, very close friend. One of the professors I was closest to was Carlos Cadena, who later he became city attorney, and that was significant in my life. And then became a justice on our Court of Appeals, and finally Chief Justice of our Fourth Court of Appeals. But when I was in law school, I liked it. And I was doing well, so I kept getting extensions. And back in those days, and I'm not sure what it is today, but back in those days you could go straight through. But you had to go 27 months, which means that I had to get until August of 1955 to graduate. And so I kept getting 6 months extensions. And I got until the spring of '55. And they turned down my request for an extension.
So you're almost out of law school, and
So I got to June. I had to get to August. And I got a rejection. I thought, oh my, what am I going to do? And I went into the dean, and I had been president of the Student Bar Association, so I knew the dean very well, and I went into the dean and I said, Dino, I've got a problem. Look, here's the rejection. I've got to get some way. And he said, there's no problem. We'll just count you present. Then I thought, oh goodness, I've got to come back in 2 years and take the bar exam on. He said, there's no problem. The bar's waived. So I left in June to go to Fort Benning, Georgia, and then I was sent to Korea.
okay. And what year was this?
I finished basic officers training in December of '55, and I got to Korea in January of '56.
What was your job in the military?
Well, I was just a platoon leader. I started out, and then after a few months of being a platoon leader in a rifle company, I was made adjutant assistant S1 of a battalion, and finally I was sent down to Busan the last 8 months. I was in Korea 16 months altogether, which was the tour at the time. And the last 8 months I was adjutant S1 of the Busan Area Command.
Okay. So you were served most of your military service overseas.
Sure, all but just the basic officers training course at Fort Benning.
Well, when you got home, I guess the friends you had made in law school were helpful to you, and your professors and things like that, and reestablishing yourself.
Yes, but I was very fortunate in that by this time, my former professor, Carlos Cadena, who was also a very, very good friend, had become city attorney, and I wrote him back. I wrote him a letter, and I just said, I'm coming home, I don't have a job. if you have any openings, I'd sure like to look at them. And the city attorney's office at that time was the best paying job in San Antonio. I also wrote the district attorney's office, and there was a young district attorney at the time, and he was a real crime-fighting guy that I would have gone to work for in a minute if he'd had an opening. Never heard from him, but Carlos wrote me a letter back and said, only thing, see me when you get back, see. And so when I got back to town, I went by and saw Carlos, and he had an opening about 6 months before that and had saved it for me.
Oh, he held it for you.
He held it for me. And so I started out in the city attorney's office.
Well, you know, looking back on this, St. Mary's really took care of you.
Oh, St. Mary's did take care of me.
At the end of that time, and really at the end of your military service.
Oh, it did. It was a great, St. Mary's was a great experience.
That's terrific. Tell us about your work in the city attorney and your continued relationship with your professor.
I had a great experience in the city attorney's office. I got to try quite a number of lawsuits. I got to help Carlos Cadena on just so many projects. And it was a wonderful experience, and certainly an experience that prepared me for private practice.
You have been a trial lawyer primarily in private practice.
Yes.
Is that where you decided you wanted to become a trial lawyer, or how did that happen?
Yes, I had not thought about doing that at all when I was in law school or in the military. But the job opening in the city attorney's office was in the trial section. And so that's, I could have gotten in the condemnation section or the tax section, or it just happened it was in the trial section. And so I became acquainted with the courts and with the trial of cases, and that got me interested in that.
You kind of took to it, it sounds like.
Well, I don't know, but that's how I got started at it.
Well, how long were you with the city attorney's office?
2.5 years.
Is that when you went into private practice?
Yes, I had tried a number of cases, and actually tried them to juries with a man by the name of Jack Hebden. And so in late '59, he approached me and said they had an opening in their law firm and that they would like for me to come over and join the law firm. And it was Gross and Hebden at the time. And so it was a very well-established law firm that had been in existence for many years, and so I went over there and joined that law firm as a result of that.
Now, by this time, you have a wife, and we know one little boy.
Right,
Did
and
your family
another one had
continue to
come by.
grow?
Yes.
Okay. And you have 3 children?
Yes.
Okay, tell us about your family, and then we'll get into your career a little bit.
I have 2 sons and a daughter who we adopted when she was 3 years of age. Our first son is a physician. He's an internist, gastroenterologist at the Ochsner Clinic in New Orleans. Okay. And he's married and has 2 boys, 17 and 14 now. And my second son, Larry, is married to he's a lawyer in San Antonio. He married a girl that he met in law school, and she too is a lawyer. And they have 3 sons. The eldest, Timothy, is a 3rd year at the University of Virginia. And second boy is a senior in high school. And the 3rd one is a sophomore in high school.
You could have your own baseball team.
I could have my own, well, not quite, but close.
That's
I'm getting
great.
there.
Do you like that granddad business?
Oh, I love being a granddad.
I imagine.
And my wife loves being a grandma, for sure.
I bet she's good at it, too.
She's an excellent grandmother.
Has she, tell us about the support that your wife has given you through your career and the choices you've made along the way.
Oh, my wife has been terrific, as you might expect. She's written 2 books. One of them is Now You're 18. And she's never made a penny off of them, but those have been used through the bar auxiliaries. Over 1 million copies has been sold, but it is a little book that they send out to schools to be taught to seniors in high school on the rights and responsibilities of growing up and becoming an adult. And then she followed it up with a book, Your Legal Rights, where she took the same subject and rewrote it at the 6th grade level to be taught to GED students and people that maybe could not understand writing at age 18.
So we're going to get into your great contributions to the profession here in a little while, but your wife has been right there along with you.
Oh
the same
yeah, she
contributions.
has been very active and president of the San Antonio Bar Auxiliary, of the State Bar Auxiliary, and
She's a delightful lady. And
Oh, well, thank
I
you.
knew she had a lot to do with it. That's why I wanted to ask.
well, she
yeah.
as a result of all those, she got the Liberty Bell Award in San Antonio given by the Bar Association, and also ABA Award for the highest award they give for public
Great.
people.
So y'all been real partners in this quest.
Oh yes, indeed.
Well, tell us about going to work at Gross and Hebden, and tell us about your mentors and the folks you learned from.
Well, I'd say my mentors there were Jack Hebden and Josh Gross. They were truly outstanding lawyers and wonderful men, wonderful teachers, wonderful mentors, and really examples of what it takes to be a good lawyer.
Tell us what that is. What you saw that if you were going to describe it to a young lawyer today and those gentlemen that you would like to see passed on through the generations.
I would say that they were very skillful lawyers who practiced law at the highest level of not only competence but professionalism and the highest level of ethics. Their words were their bonds, and I think that they both had committed their lives to improving the system of justice.
Charles, we've talked a lot about your law practice and your family. I want to talk about leadership, because you've been active in leadership in San Antonio and around the state as lawyers. But I want to talk first about the community. Some of the things that you had an opportunity to do in serving the city of San Antonio. Tell us what some of those gratifying experiences were.
Well, when back in the late 50s and early 60s in San Antonio anyway, the leading young men's group was the Junior Chamber of Commerce, or the JCs. It's not that way anymore, but back then that was the group to be in, because they believed that any idea that you come up with, if you could put it together, then they're for it. And so I got involved in the JCs early. At least in our firm, you either went the junior bar, that's what the young lawyers was called back in those days, or you went the JC route. And I went the JC route because they were just people that I admired. They were doing things. And so, and in the middle 60s, I was president of the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And we were involved in such things, and we put on an Americanism seminar. We co-sponsored during the years when I was involved there the River Parade during Fiesta Week. We put on, some people put on Miss San Antonio. We put on the the Orphans Christmas Shopping Tour, which was the forerunner to all these organizations now putting on these things at Christmas time for orphans. But, and when I was president, I was looking for a project, and in those days, I was in the courthouse every single day, almost without fail. I was trying a case, doing something in the courthouse, and I saw we had about 6 district courts. People, they'd come, the jurors would come in for a week. It's different now because they come in, they're not used, they're discharged, and more are brought in the next day. We have 4 or 5 times as many courts. It's different. But in any event, and I noticed one time, there was the jurors, once they got sworn in, just hung around the hall all week. And I started thinking, well, they need a place to go. We need a central jury room. And and I knew the man who was in charge of the courthouse, and I went to him and I said, why don't we have a central jury room? He said, well, we don't have any room. And nobody's ever come up with this thought before. So I said, well, it seems to me we ought to have a place. I don't care what it's called or anything like that, but need to have a place for the jurors to go to watch television, to read newspapers or magazines or listen to the radio or do something during the day while they're waiting to get called for a jury. And he said, well, we just don't have any room. So I organized a committee in the JCs made up of engineers and architects, and I took them over there, and the man's name in charge of the courthouse was Mike Rule, who was an uncle of one of my close friends, who we'd played baseball together with during the high school years. And they looked around, and we saw that we had a big, magnificent county courtroom. It was 2 stories high. There was no space, but they said, hey, we can make this, we can put a floor and a ceiling there and make this on the 3rd floor here. We can do something with that and make it into a central jury room. So we made a proposal to the Commissioner's Court for that, and came up, and they made drawings, and I presented this to the Commissioner's Court, that we need a central jury room, and we set out the reasons for it. Here is our proposal. Here's our estimated cost. And we didn't think anybody would be opposed to that. And here comes the San Antonio Bar and opposed to it.
What was their opposition based on?
Well, their main argument, they admitted that, you know, it would be nice to have a place for them to go, but there's just no space. But their argument was, if we put a central jury room in here, we're going to be here at the turn of the century. Now, this was in 1965 or thereabouts. And the turn of the century, year 2000,
Didn't think you'd ever get there.
It was a lifetime or a couple generations in front. In the end, the Commissioner's Court bought our argument. They did exactly as we had proposed and put in the central jury room. Now we're on our 3rd one. But I tell you, every time I go through that central jury room, I think about this.
Were central jury rooms common at the time?
Well, you know what? I don't know, because at the time, I tried a lot of cases all through South Texas, in San Antonio and South Texas, but I'd never been to Houston or Dallas to try a lawsuit. I don't know whether they were or not, but I know that they weren't in San Antonio and South Texas.
Well, now everybody wants one.
I'm sure most big cities have them. And now we're up to, you know, many times the number of courts. Well,
we talk about, you know, all the time as lawyers, we spend a lot of time talking about the system and people that are important to the system. But those individuals that you were looking for a place to sit and be comfortable are pretty fundamental to the system.
oh, absolutely. And And the first jury room was just as we had planned. It had an area for watch television. They had an area for reading. It was the idea of they would have a place to go. Now it is not quite as homey as it was for the first one.
Right. Well, let's, you know, JC's,
Right.
I think they end their initial saying with the best work of life, but that's a group that was optimistic, can do, I think.
It was a can-do group.
And I think that's kind of marked your attitude as well.
Well, thank you. I hope so.
Well, I know that you fought the bar on the Central Jury Room, but I know you've also, of course, been very active in leadership in the bar. Did you do local bar work?
Yes, I think probably maybe as a result of this, I don't know. I got on the local grievance committee, obviously a state bar committee, but it was on the local, and I was on there for 6 years, and I was chairman of that for 5 years. And that evolved into, I was asked to, and I ran for the board of directors of the San Antonio Bar, and I was on that and moved up to vice president, then president of the San Antonio Bar. And then typically I ran for and was elected to the State Bar Board of Directors.
Okay, and what year were you on the State Bar Board?
78 until 82. The last year I was chairman of the State Bar Board of Directors. And then, and as chairman, then I don't know what they do now, but then you served a year as immediate past chairman.
So, and I think we do the same thing now and run the nominations committee or something like that.
We didn't even do that.
Okay.
I think it was, but
Just stayed on the board an extra year.
you stayed on the board and for another year.
Who were some of the people that you worked with up to that point in time in bar work that you'd like to talk about? Some of the, whether they be characters or leaders that you admire.
Oh, goodness. There were a lot of people that were really good bar people. Of course, the presidents. Lloyd Lockridge was one of the presidents during that time. One of my favorites, and when I was board chairman, it was Franklin Jones Jr. from Marshall. Great, great lawyer, wonderful president. Wayne Fisher was another one, great trial. And these are some of the greatest trial lawyers in the history of Texas.
That is one of the fun things about bar work is the contacts you get to make that you otherwise might not get to do.
Just really great, great lawyers. I'm just thinking back of some of the people that Chris Doherty was another bar president. Very good.
You have kind of toiled at the grassroots on a grievance committee. That's hard work. I think people who have never served on one don't realize how difficult that task is. But you stayed involved in the disciplinary system and have continued to serve in those capacities. Could you tell us a little bit about your role in that system?
Sure. Following the time that I was president of State Bar, I was asked to, and I agreed to serve on the Commission on Judicial Conduct, and that's a 6-year term, and I did that. And I was chairman of that for 4 years. And then they were having some problems on the Commission on Lawyer Discipline. And I agreed to go on that, and I was vice chairman and then chairman of that commission. And I'm currently on the Board of Disciplinary Appeals.
I ask those questions just to point out how many hard jobs you've held
Oh, well,
at the
listen,
bar. You know, of course, as president, as you know, you get the opportunity to make appointments to those various commissions, and those are some of the more taxing jobs that we appoint people to.
I'm just an old bar junkie.
Well, the Board of Disciplinary Appeals is something that we don't hear a lot about, and I think for good reason. They work in confidence, if you will, but tell us what that work is and what the role is of the Board of Disciplinary Appeals.
Well, I'm finding this very interesting, and obviously the people I'm working with are a whole lot younger than I am, but very, very energetic and so bright. But among other things that the board does, they hear and consider appeals where an individual will file a complaint against a lawyer. And then it's reviewed by the disciplinary council, and they may state that, may find that it doesn't state a complaint or it doesn't state a violation of any ethical standards. So they won't accept it as a complaint against the lawyer, and they'll just dismiss it. Those people can appeal them, and that takes a lot of time, and because we have hundreds of those. And we serve on panels of 3 that hear those, and we get, we all are on panels that hundreds are considered every month. And then, of course, if a lawyer chooses to go through the disciplinary system on appeal rather than go through the court system, and a case is tried before a grievance committee, that can be appealed, and so we hear those appeals. If a lawyer is found guilty of a criminal offense, and then we look at those convictions and we determine what should happen to their license. Those are just 3 areas that we consider, and we meet every other month as a body.
Really kind of a quiet, unpaid appellate court.
It is made up of 12 lawyers appointed by the Supreme Court.
Well, while we're on this subject, and I am going to get to you being bar president, but while we're on this subject, I think the image of lawyers is important, and I think that the disciplinary process plays a very important role in that. But give us some of your thoughts about the profession and the image of the profession.
All right. The image, there's no question but what the image of lawyers is pretty low. I think all professions have their problems in that respect when you stop and think about it. For example, physicians are often thought of as quacks. They're given the name quacks. Policemen are called pigs. You know, bankers are called Simon Legree. A psychiatrist is called a shrink. My eldest son, as I mentioned, is an internist gastroenterologist. They're called fleas.
I hadn't heard that one yet.
Well, he told me that. He says the flea gets on that body and it doesn't get off until long after it's dead. But and lawyers, you know, are called ambulance chasers, shysters, you name it. But that comes with the territory. And I think that there are a lot of things. It's very complex as the reason for the images image of lawyers being so poor. I think that, of course, advertising has just been terrible for our legal profession. TV shows and movies don't normally show lawyers in a real favorable light. That doesn't sell many tickets. Books, you know, all of Gresham's books, and you've probably read
Reading one right now.
I mean, very seldom are lawyers put in favorable lights.
Right.
But I really think that the root cause goes deeper than all those things. And I think it's something that we need to try to address. And that is, I don't believe that people, the public, really know what lawyers do and why we do it. For example, lawyers, we represent schools, we represent churches and corporations and big businesses and we wear the white hat on those things. We also represent presidents and governors, people on the cabinets, and senators and congressmen, and that people understand those things. We represent the dispossessed, we represent the disadvantaged, the elderly, but we also represent the people who are held in very, very low esteem, criminals.
Unpopular.
The unpopular. We represent terrorists, we represent killers, and we're appointed to represent killers on death row. We're appointed to represent terrorists. And I think that as a result of that, we bear the burden of people just don't like us for that. I think a lot of those people, they don't think they're entitled to defense. They don't think they're entitled to their constitutional rights. And I think that in some way, and that hurts our reputation. And I think in some way, we've got to find a way to educate the people on exactly what we do and the reason for doing it. We've got to educate them on the fact that when we represent those people, that we're really defending everybody's constitutional rights. And until we find a way of doing that, I think our reputations, our image is always going to be low. It's not a matter of being loved by the public, because I think that if we were loved by the public, we really wouldn't be doing our job.
Yeah, about half the public's always going to be against you.
Oh yeah, well, on that divorce case, you're not going to get many Christmas cards from the spouse of the other person that you represented. But we've got to find a way of educating the public on what we do, and perhaps if they understand our role, we won't be loved. We don't want to be loved, but maybe we'll be understood and respected. And I think that's what we have to shoot for.
And that's good enough.
That's all we care for.
You know, I do want to get to the opportunity that you and I share to get to run for and serve as president of the State Bar of Texas. What did you find most rewarding about being State Bar president? What are you proud of?
Well, a lot of it depends on what's happening at the time, and you have no control over it. Right. When I always believed that when you're president-elect, it really is the most significant year, because you've really got to make your plans that year. Because when the bell goes off and you become president, as you well know, you're mainly reacting to everything.
Right. Your time's no longer your own.
That's right. But when you're president-elect, then that is, and it just happens to whatever falls on your plate.
Well, something pretty big fell on your plate.
Oh my! Well, two things.
Okay, tell us about those.
One thing was, we decided that we needed to have mandatory continuing legal education, MCLE. But there was a little problem. It had to be passed by referendum by the lawyers of Texas. So in my case, we that was the big thing that really fell into place. The State Bar had a terrible record of, number one, and to get a referendum passed, you first of all had to get a 51% of the vote out.
Right.
You had to get 51% of the lawyers to vote on any single issue. And then of the 51%, you had to get 51% in your favor. And so that was the big problem. And so that's what I began the task of trying to solve.
And not without controversy, I'm sure.
Oh, there was always you have lots of controversy. But we had another issue too at the same time, and that was IOLTA was on our plate, and we had to begin the implementation of IOLTA, which was interest on lawyers' trust account.
And that money goes to provide legal services to the poor.
Oh,
to
yes,
facilitate
indeed.
that. Okay.
And but that was not even considered before. And it was voluntary at that time. But the question was, how do we, at the same time we're running an MCLA campaign, how do we get this IOLTA program establish it and get it rolling?
Right.
And so in any event, on the MCLA, we got the referendum in front of the lawyers, and we got not just 51%, we got nearly 70% of the vote out. And of that number, almost 70% voted in favor of it. In other words, the lawyers, almost 70%, it was 68 or 69% as I recall.
Pretty remarkable getting them to agree to make something mandatory that's going to cost them time and money.
You betcha. When you really think about it, that means that almost 70% of the lawyers agreed that from then on, they were going to take at least 15 hours of continuing legal education a year. And that, as I say, it just passed with flying colors.
Well, it's made us a better bar.
Well, I think it's made for better lawyers for sure.
Right. You know, Charles, you had the privilege, because I had the privilege of being there when you were recognized as a 50-year lawyer in San Antonio at the Bar Convention, I guess 2 summers ago. 50 years is a long time. It may not seem like it, but there have been a lot of changes in this profession during that time. What are the significant changes you've seen in the 50 years of practice?
You know, the practice of law has changed so much. For example, just the way you practiced. At least in San Antonio back when I started, we didn't have air conditioning. You know, it was the fans. You open the windows and you'd have the fans in the...
Not the big plush offices we see today.
Oh, no. In the courthouse, our courthouse is built. If you ever come to San Antonio, you'll see the district courts. They have windows all the way around. It's built so that in the summertime you would get the air coming through. The fans could blow fresh air around. We'd try cases and the windows would be open and they'd be disturbed by trucks and cars driving down the street and honking their horns and people outside. And of course, the bar was smaller. We didn't have as many people then. The cases were not as complex. You don't think about this, but we had no women. There were certainly no women judges. Very, very few women lawyers. Women didn't even sit on juries. People today would have difficulty in believing that, but that's true. The juries were made up of all men, and in order to serve, you had to pay your poll tax. So, and back in those days, we had contributory negligence, not comparative negligence like we do now. If a jury found 1% on the plaintiff, they didn't recover. So you had more conservative jurors. We tried so many more cases than now for a lot of reasons. We were in the courthouse all the time trying cases, but it was the bar was more collegial with one another. You didn't have Rule 11 agreements. It was a handshake is what counted. Right. It was a totally different practice than it is now.
That brings us to, I know, a subject that's important to you, and that's this ideal of professionalism. What would you tell a lawyer my age, for that matter, but particularly someone coming into the profession today, what it means to be a professional?
Well, that's one of the things that has bothered me the most about where we're going. There's not the professionalism today as there was back then. I think the root cause is the fact that there's a disappearance of idealism. Just like I don't think you can have a marriage without love. You can't have a partnership without trust. You can't have a true faith in a religious sense without a true belief. I don't think that you can have, in my judgment, professionalism without idealism. I don't think you can have it unless most of the people believe that they're involved in a high calling. And you can't, they've got to believe that the purpose for their practicing law is above money. It's above fame. It's above self-promotion. In a real profession, you don't have a place for Rambo tactics. You don't have a place for junkyard dogs or obstructionists or mercenaries or rude bullies. Those terms are just totally foreign and not consistent, in my judgment, of what I think that a real profession calls for. But I think there's hope for it. Some years ago, I was fortunate enough to be given that Lola Wright Foundation Award by the Texas Bar Foundation for professionalism, and it came with it a $5,000 stipend. And I had it dedicated to St. Mary's University to use to promote professionalism. I felt strong about it then, and I still do, and I feel stronger about it now, that we've got to do something. And I don't know the answer other than you got to start somewhere, and it ought to start in the law schools, and it ought to be emphasized in the law schools. And if it's not there, and I think in addition to that, I think it's up to the older lawyers to begin really promoting professionalism within the bars and the law firms. Right. And you know, whether we like it or not, whether we want to assume the position, and we don't, but assume, we are truly the priests of our profession. And unless we do it, unless the bar leaders do it, unless we start attacking this, it's going to continue to decline. If as a goal, if today, if you were to say, or if somebody would say that person has the ethics of a lawyer, it'd be laughed at.
Right. Call it an oxymoron.
Oh, yeah. If Jay Leno or Letterman would say on television, oh, this person has the ethics of a lawyer, they'd draw the biggest laugh. But I think our goal ought to be that it won't happen in my lifetime, but in generations to come, that if we start attacking the problem like I think it ought to be attacked, that when it will be something in great high esteem. I think our goal ought to be that when somebody is saying, hey, that person has the ethics of a lawyer, it's the highest compliment that one could get. And I think that ought to be our goal. I know it's a lofty goal, but I think that's what it should be.
Well, Charles Smith, you have lived your life that way.
Oh,
you're
nice.
part of the
Thank you.
solution, and I'm so grateful to you for coming and joining us.
Well, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you very much.